Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Friday, the 15th of August. I'm Stephen Carroll in London. Coming up today, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin head to Alaska for face-to-face talks on Ukraine as nervous European leaders watch on. Tax rises, wage costs and weak spending mean London is bearing the brunt of the UK's jobs slowdown. Plus, keeping football transfers on side, Apollo and Blackstone look to score big with private debt-financed player acquisitions in a €5 billion market. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has sought to strengthen his relationship with Donald Trump ahead of their summit today in Alaska. At a Kremlin meeting with senior officials, Putin praised the US president's efforts to broker an end to the war in Ukraine, dangling the promise of economic cooperation. President Trump, meanwhile, has described the talks in Anchorage as a feel-out meeting. Here's what he told reporters at the White House.
President Putin would like to see a deal. I think if I weren't president, he would take over all of Ukraine. In my opinion, he would much rather take over all of Ukraine. But I am president, and he's not going to mess around with me.
Trump later suggested that some allied countries could participate in a second meeting and that it may also take place in Alaska. We'll have full coverage of today's meeting between Trump and Putin, as well as an expected joint press conference following the summit on Bloomberg Radio. China's economy slowed across the board in July, suggesting the disruption from tariffs is beginning to ripple through the wider economy. Factory activity, investment and retail sales all fell below forecasts in what one economist called an evident loss of momentum. Speaking via translator, the chief economist at China's National Bureau of Statistics, Fu Linghui, says both trade and extreme weather had a serious impact on the economy.
In July, the international environment was complex and grave. The impact of trade protectionism and unilateralism lingered. Some regions inside China experienced extreme weather events such as heat waves, heavy rain and flooding, causing short-term effect on the economy.
Chief economist Fu added that exports to the EU were up by 8% as China diversifies its trade away from the United States. But the slowdown has raised questions about whether Beijing may decide on further fiscal stimulus. Shares in Intel rose sharply after it was revealed the Trump administration is considering taking a stake in the company. Bloomberg has learned the plan stems from a meeting this week between President Trump and Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan. Here's Tom Giles, our executive editor for tech.
This is really early days, but it would be a pretty momentous event and development in terms of, new ways that the Trump administration is inserting itself into U.S. industries. We saw it with the steel industry previously, and now with chips.
Bloomberg's Tom Giles in San Francisco. Intel didn't comment on the report, but says it's committed to supporting President Trump's efforts to strengthen US technology and manufacturing leadership. Shares finished over 7% higher on Wall Street and rose another 4% in the after-hours session. 1 in 4 job losses in the UK have come from London since last year's budget. Britain's capital is bearing the brunt of the labour market slowdown. Bloomberg's James Wilcock has the story.
The rent is higher, the business rates are higher, and staff demand more money. That's Business Group UK Hospitality's view on why London, the UK's most productive city, is shedding jobs well above the national average rate. Although UK GDP growth for the first half of the year is the highest in the G7, economists are saying that is being driven by public sector spending. That leaves private sector hubs like London taking a bigger hit as businesses cut back. In London, James Wilcock, Bloomberg Radio.
US and Canadian banks are summoning staff back to the office at a faster rate than their European rivals. Bloomberg analysis shows just 7 of Europe's 15 most valuable lenders have asked some or all employees to work 4 days or more from the office per week. That's compared to 11 of the 15 biggest North American firms who've made the same request. The news comes amidst a widening debate over the topic as industry leaders such as Bill Winters and Jamie Dimon exhibit opposing views on the future of work. Turning next to the fierce battle among Europe's top flight of football, sparking a private debt boom. The phenomenon has even attracted some of the sector's biggest names. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
With just over 2 weeks left of football's summer transfer window, competition for top players is heating up. Ballooning fees, regularly topping $100 million for a single player, have piqued the interest of some of Europe's biggest private lenders, hoping to get a slice of the action. Bloomberg understands names including Apollo and Blackstone, who declined to comment on the matter, are helping to ignite a debt market within the sport, using transfer fees as collateral. Traditionally the preserve of specialised lenders, this summer's €5 billion player spending bill has attracted high-value firms hoping to strike big. The changing fortunes of clubs who face victory or relegation every season mean traditional banks aren't very active in the football world, leaving an open goal for private lenders to score. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Those are your top stories on the markets. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index up by 0.5%. European stock futures are higher by 0.5% as well this morning. As we're looking at the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, a tenth weaker. The Japanese yen strengthening further against the US dollar by 0.4%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.27%. In a moment, we'll bring you more on what to expect from today's meeting between the US and Russian presidents, plus why London has been worst hit by the slowdown in the UK jobs market. But another story that caught our eye this morning: does your accessory need its own accessory? Well, that's what luxury firms are hoping anyway. Now, Mika Barkley has been writing about this trend of bag charms, the best example of which is perhaps the Labubu dolls, which you may be spotting on handbags and backpacks around where you live. She writes that the big luxury names are keen to get in on this trend, though, because if consumers can't be convinced to buy a new bag, which might be a much bigger purchase, they could perhaps be tempted into the purchase of smaller items like a branded charm. This is coming after a period where we've had some of the big luxury names like LVMH and Kering reporting underperforming fashion and luxury goods businesses. The CEO of Coach said this week that the brand was killing it with bag charms. Now, Bloomberg Intelligence says that ultimately these will only make up a very small portion of sales for these premium fashion labels, but it could just be enough to keep consumers and brands connected if consumers are maybe feeling a little bit squeezed and don't have the money to splash out on bigger items as well. Can we call this a charm offensive? Answers on a postcard. You can read the full story on Bloomberg.com, and on the terminal we'll put a link to the story in our podcast show notes. Let's bring you more now on what to expect from Donald Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin. Our news desk editor, Jill Deesis, joins us now for more. Jill, we've been reporting on these comments from Vladimir Putin praising Donald Trump ahead of this meeting. What should we read into those comments?
Good morning, Stephen. Well, I think as many world leaders have really found over this period of time where Trump's return to office, flattery does seem to get you quite a lot of places with Donald Trump. It does feel a bit like Putin is going into this meeting. First of all, it's on U.S. soil. It marks his return to the United States for the first time in about a decade. Does seem like he's fairly confident about his position within the Russia's war in Ukraine. And now this is something where it kind of feels like Putin is trying to broaden out the purposes of this meeting a bit. I mean, if you're Putin, you're going into this meeting looking at the way that U.S.-Russia relations have really evolved over the last several years, obviously worsening significantly. Maybe this is an opportunity for a bit of a reset. You've got, the possibility that, Putin could try to bring up the potential for an arms deal. That's something that he had tried to press Trump on during his first term as president. Maybe that's something that makes a return. We see Putin kind of highlighting this idea of further economic cooperation between the U.S. and Russia. So at least if you're Russia, if you're Putin in this particular case, it does seem like maybe there's an opportunity here to turn this into more about a meeting that's about the U.S.-Russia relationship rather than focusing solely on the idea of what's happening in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, for Donald Trump, he's been dialing back expectations about what could come from these talks. What would success look like for him?
Yes, he really has. And it does seem like, it's really Trump going into this meeting, that carries a little bit more of a risk. He's describing this as really a feeling out meeting. He said that he foresaw a 25% chance that this would not be successful. So yes, we really do see Trump kind of dialing back expectations here. I mean, if you're Donald Trump, you just came out of talks with the EU and with Ukraine, where they're, really, really pushing for no kind of, territorial concessions or anything like that to to be agreed to or anything like that in this type of call. I mean, I think, for the United States pushing this further in terms of, coming out of this kind of controlling the narrative, furthering, another meeting maybe between Trump, Zelensky, and Putin might look like a victory there. But it is a bit of a risky time here.
Ukraine, meanwhile, of course, not represented at this meeting. How much of a concern is that for Kyiv and European leaders who are watching on from a distance?
Well, I think, Stephen, just the fact that you did have, this pre-meeting between Trump and then those European leaders and Zelensky, just sort of setting this up, I think does kind of show that clearly there's quite a bit of concern about what may be said or not during this meeting. I mean, again, Zelensky has made very clear he does not want to cede the eastern Donbas region to Russia as part of any ceasefire deal. But again, Putin obviously going into this meeting kind of feeling, like Russia is perhaps winning the war in Ukraine at this point. I mean, yes, I think, any concerns that Trump may, bring up anything like that, I think, would be of concern with Zelensky because he's not actually physically in the room, with these two leaders. But, again, we'll have to see what ultimately, Trump and Putin kind of come out of with this meeting and how exactly, that could potentially pave the way for further meetings ahead.
Of course, this meeting's taking place just outside of Anchorage in a military base there. And we've done some great reporting about how this influx of the Secret Service into this city has really upended how things are running there. Just talk us through how this meeting is playing out and the preparations for it in the city.
Yes, this is super fascinating because, Anchorage, otherwise, obviously, a fairly, medium-sized town as far as, or city as far as United States cities go. But, this is obviously such a massive event because if you have to imagine there are hundreds of reinforcements coming into the sound. This, the idea of people we spoke to saying it's basically body for body, gun for gun when it comes to the Americans versus the Russians in terms of how they're actually setting up. We spoke to, some, people who were running short-term rentals. At this time of year, it's normally tourists that they would be housing at this point, who want to go see glaciers or maybe there's business travelers. Now, those same, sort of hotels and such are fielding calls from Secret Service agents. They're fielding calls from the Russian consulate, trying to get, as many people as possible in. And you also have to imagine that, there's a limit in terms of how many, cars you can actually bring in. I mean, we've been reporting that in terms of motorcades, the U.S. is actually flying up motorcades from the lower 48 states in order to make this happen. So it's clearly a massive undertaking that, on both the side of the U.S. and on Russia to try to bring everybody together and ultimately make this meeting happen.
Jill Desis, our news desk editor, thank you very much for talking us through all of the preparations for that meeting and, of course, full coverage on Bloomberg as it happens. Now, London is bearing the brunt of the UK's jobs slowdown as a combination of tax rises, higher wage costs and weak consumer spending forced the city's businesses to cut payrolls faster than in the rest of the country. That's according to the latest economic data published this week. And our UK economy reporter, Irina Angel, joins me now for more. Irina, good morning. How many jobs then have been lost in London and which sectors are worst affected?
Morning, Stephen. So London has lost almost 45,000 jobs since the October budget. And that's, of course, when Labour announced the 26 billion increase in employers' national insurance and the new higher minimum wage. To put things into perspective, this means that 1 in 4 of all job losses across the country over that period happened in the capital. And the losses are really concentrated in 4 sectors, all of which have a large share of their staff in London. So first we have retail and hospitality. Remember, these ones employ a lot of workers and a lot of low-paid workers. So they were the most affected by Labour's changes. But also we had white-collar parts of the economy, like IT and communications and the professional, technical and scientific sector.
So why is it that London's being worse affected than other parts of the country? Because it's disproportionate, the losses, versus London's impact, I suppose, London's proportion to the population of the UK.
That's right, but it's actually 3 reasons. So first, employing people in London is very expensive. If you're an employer trying to trim expenses after being hit with higher taxes, London is the obvious place to cut costs from. Then secondly, retail and hospitality businesses face higher costs across the board in London. So it's not just wages, but also rents, business rates, etc. And that's at the same time as households remain cautious to spend in bars and restaurants. So there's just not enough money coming in to pay for these higher costs in the capital. And finally, London is a hotspot for IT, management consultancies, or communications companies. And while these sectors are less affected by the NI increase, they're facing very strong global headwinds. So, some are still freezing recruitment after they overexpanded after COVID, and also as they face a more uncertain world. And for others, actually, AI is also impacting hiring. We see the first signs that the technology is replacing some jobs in finance, marketing, and management consulting. And oftentimes, these are jobs in London.
And just briefly, Irina, from here, are things set to get better or worse?
Well, it's not looking good, Stephen. Retailers told me there's more job losses to come. We have the new autumn budget coming up with new speculation of tax rises, and that's further hitting consumer spending. It's a repeat of last year. And on a more macro level, we know now that the economy is basically being propped up by government spending. And this could be benefiting areas of the country that rely more on the public sector than London does. So it could end up shifting away jobs from London even more.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.